Hello and welcome to this month's Part-Time Grappler podcast with me, your host, Liam Wandi. In this podcast, I will share some of the many lessons I've learned from the various martial arts teachers I've been lucky to meet and train with over the years, thanks to the blog The Part-Time Grappler. I will also share some of the ideas that my training as a secondary school teacher, that's what I do for a living, has fostered in me, whether that's regarding structuring a curriculum, teaching methodology, time management, or even lesson structure for those of us who teach martial arts in any capacity. I hope you enjoy listening to these podcasts as much as I enjoy making them. So, without further ado, I hand you over to myself and this month's Part-Time Grappler podcast. The idea behind today's podcast actually came to me while I was listening to another Jiu-Jitsu related podcast. It's called the Jiu-Jitsu Brotherhood podcast, and it's made by Roger Gracie black belt Nick Grigoriadis. I've known of Nick's work for a long time, and I'm a huge fan of the material that he puts out. He is quite the thinker, so I urge you to listen to a few of those episodes. In that podcast that I was listening to, he was having an interview. He was having a chat with this guy he was interviewing, another Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And he made a comment. He said that there is a finite number of Jiu-Jitsu sparring rounds left in him. And I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And it still does. But I just thought I would investigate that matter a little bit more. And this is how I'm planning on doing it. Now, ask any Jiu-Jitsu practitioner on the planet, how long do you think you will train Jiu-Jitsu? Now, the answer will always be an easy one. Most people will say, if not all of them, will always say, I'm never going to stop this, I'm going to do this forever. And as sentimental and heartwarming as this answer may be, obviously it's not accurate. Even if you practice every day for the rest of your life, well, you will have to stop one day, hopefully long into the far future. But being a numbers guy, I thought I'd investigate the general parameters of that issue, and by looking at this particular question. And the question is, how many Jiu-Jitsu sparring rounds has the average black belt participated? As you can imagine, the variables are many, but as with many of those questions, not as many as you think. Human beings are far more predictable than we give ourselves credit. Let's start by examining and pinning down a few of those variables and constants that are involved in the question. Okay? There are 52 weeks in a year. Most people, and I'll explain what I mean by most people in a second, train 2 to 4 sessions per week, averaging 1 to 2 hours per session. Most Jiu-Jitsu academies or gyms close 1 to 2 weeks per year. I know some places stay open, some places close a little bit more, but most of them close 1 to 2 weeks per year. And while academies range between 0 to 10 rounds per training hour, depending on the training time of the year and the level of the students, the majority seem to use an average of anywhere between 3 to 6 sparring rounds per training hour. As an aside, while academies I've visited use a range of round durations, anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes, the majority seem to use somewhere around about 6 to 7 minute rounds. That's the kind of the number they seem to hover around, 6 to 7 minute round duration. Now, using the information above, I would like to suggest a range for how many sparring rounds an average Jiu-Jitsu practitioner participates in every year. At the lower end of the range, we'll use the smaller numbers. So we'll say 50 training weeks per year, where you train twice per week. Each session is approximately 1 hour. And in each session, you do about three sparring rounds. So the numbers at the low end of the scale are 50 times 2 times 1 times 3 gives you 300 sparring rounds per year. At the upper end of the range, you'll have somebody who's training 51 training weeks per year, so they still take a week off, whether it's for injury or for traveling or for whatever have you. In those 51 training weeks per year, they do 4 sessions per week. Each session is around about 2 hours. And they do about 6 sparring rounds per hour. So quite sparring intensive. Now the numbers for this end of the scale, the upper end of the range, will be 51 times 4 times 2 times 6, which comes to 2,448 rounds per year. Okay, so if my amateurish calculations are to be trusted, we can draw many, many conclusions from this data, but 2 conclusions jump straight out at me. First conclusion is that in Jiu-Jitsu, there's a very wide range, 300 all the way to 2,448, a very wide range separating those who spar the least and those who spar the most. And like I said, I'm talking about most people. I'm not even including the training twice a day, 6 days per week outliers, the Miao brothers and other, this growing layer of jiu-jitsu practitioners who are taking the sport seriously, and it's more or less their life revolves around jiu-jitsu. So definitely not part-time grapplers, more like full-time grapplers. Now, this wide range of sparring rounds may contribute, in fact, it does contribute to the wide range of perceived skill that you encounter when you're rolling with or competing against people who on paper have the same color belt as each other. That's the first conclusion, wide range. The second conclusion is that even at the lower end of the scale, which is 300 sparring rounds every year, jiu-jitsu practitioners spar a lot, a whole lot, especially compared to practitioners of other martial arts. If we add to that the fact that jiu-jitsu rounds, which, like I said, seem to hover around 6 to 10 minutes, are on average 2 to 3.5 times longer than most other martial arts, the average of which seems to hover around 3 minutes, and the total duration spent sparring in jiu-jitsu compared to other martial arts becomes staggering. We do more sparring rounds than other martial arts, and the rounds are much longer, which might not surprise a lot of people, especially those who have done jiu-jitsu and other martial arts other than jiu-jitsu. Now, using these figures and incorporating the average length of time it takes to reach the level of black belt in jiu-jitsu, which a lot of people agree is around 10 years. I've heard many interviews where people are saying it's going down, it's being reduced, which is fine, but I think the average is still around 10 years. So if we incorporate that into the range that I suggested earlier on, then the average grappler will experience anywhere between 3,000 to 24,480 sparring rounds between the time they step into the Jiu-Jitsu Academy for the first time and the time they wear a black belt. Why am I doing these calculations? Well, other than the obvious, which is that I'm a numbers geek, it's because I want to suggest a crazy idea. And here's my idea. If we were to look at the number right in the middle, so in the middle of our range, so not the low end of the range, not the high end of the range, right in the middle, we'd say 13,740 rounds between the day you walk in and the day you wear a black belt. My suggestion is not all these rounds need to be kill or be killed rounds. Crazy idea, I know. If we decide to roll hard with the intention of asserting our game plan and pushing the pace every other training session instead of every session, so every other training session, then we will still get in just shy of 7,000 hard rounds. Hell, even if we roll hard every fourth training session, then we will still get in over 3,400 hard rounds where we are pushing our A game, really, really working hard. And the rest of the time, we're not just chilling. I mean, we still have over 10,300 other sparring rounds where we are experimenting a little bit, opening up our game, working on our defense, incorporating new techniques, working on fluidity of transition. Now, if we put this into perspective, a young, athletic purple belt who's been training for approximately 5 years, let's say 5 weeks of training per year, 50 weeks of training per year, 3 times per week, and say 2-hour sessions every time, and they do 4 rounds per hour. Somebody who trains like that would have amassed 17,000 rounds of sparring in those 5 years. And if all their rounds are life or death rounds, then it is not impossible that they will be sharp enough to occasionally catch a recreational black belt, or at least threaten them every now and again in sparring. But we've all seen way too many such purple belts quit before they reach their potential. In fact, many of them quit before they reach brown belt. And it's always so sad to run into them every now and again. You run into them years after they quit jiu-jitsu, but you continue. You look into their eyes and you know that they really miss jiu-jitsu, but at the same time, you also know that they will never come back to it. In the words of Chris Hauter, it's not who's good, it's who's left. So stop kidding yourself. You can't train forever, but you can train for the rest of your life. And the only way that you can do that is if you stop rolling like every round is your last. Okay, folks, that brings us to the end of this month's podcast. If you have any feedback, I would love to hear it. You can find my email through either the blog or my own personal website, both of which you can find simply by Googling either the Part-Time Grappler or my name, Liam Wandi. That's LIAMWANDI. These two sites are also the best place to find out more about academies I'll be visiting or upcoming seminars or competitions I'm doing or participating in. And of course, if you're there as well, it would be really cool to meet up. Thanks again to all those who download and listen to this podcast. I really appreciate it. And if you could go to iTunes and Stitcher or however which way you choose to listen to this podcast and subscribe to it and of course give us a 5-star rating, then the next time I meet you, I promise to give you a hug or at least a firm handshake, depending on your preference. Okay, thank you very much for listening.